Great. Progress. I work in the world of education, so I talk about progress a lot. I hear it talked about a lot. I think progress is a good thing. I think progress means that we are moving forward. It means that we are learning from what has gone before in the past and improving it for what's ahead in the future. And I think there's something in us as humans that drives us forward. We want to get better, to reach further, to know more, to discover more. I don't think we need to be obsessed with progress. And I don't think that it's a case of pursuing progress at any cost. But I do think it's good to make progress, to be the best version of ourselves that we can be. In schools, we've got a long way to go on this, but there has been a shift from talking about achievement and attainment towards talking about progress. And I think that's the right move for lots of reasons, because I think when we talk about progress, it's important because it allows for the fact that we haven't all started at the same place. And it also removes the pressure of comparing ourselves with the person next to us. And it also removes that impossible expectation that we'll all reach the same endpoint at the same time. So progress is about identifying where you were, acknowledging how far you've come, looking at where you want to get to, and identifying what choices and actions you will need to get you there. We read about progress in the Bible too. In 1 Timothy 4, it says this: "Don't let anyone look down on you because you are young, but set an example for the believers in speech, in conduct, in love, in faith, in purity. Be diligent in these matters. Give yourselves wholly to them so that everyone may see your progress." And we also find lots in the Bible about transformation, about being transformed, about growing, about pressing on, about becoming more Christ-like. And in that, there are two parts. We read about our responsibility to be diligent and to make good choices. But we also read about the transforming power of God's Spirit at work in us. And so all that really is to set us up for the fact that I've been really challenged this week by the passages, and I'm going to pass that challenge on to us this morning. I'm going to invite us to review how we're doing in our lives, to consider where there might be room for progress, and to think about maybe choices or actions that we might take as a result. But as we think about that together today, I want us to be really clear about a few things first. This is not about condemning any of us or making any of us feel guilty. This is not about comparing ourselves to others and feeling inferior or superior. This is not about working hard to make ourselves good enough for God. But this is about recognizing that there are areas in all of our lives where there's room for progress. It's about understanding that we are held and known and loved by our powerful God who is in the business of transformation. God who challenges us and helps us and guides us because he wants to see his children living and enjoying life to the full. And it's about recognizing that we have a responsibility for our choices and our actions, and being open to the idea that perhaps we might make changes in our own lives. So I want to ask you a question. The first question I'm going to ask you this morning is, what or who do you say is most important to you? If I ask you to list your top 3, or top 5, or top 10 even, what would your answer be? Who or what do you say is most important to you? I imagine lots of us will have started with people, family, friends. Perhaps we'll include our health, maybe our houses or cars. I wonder where God or faith features on your list. Are you familiar with that analogy of the rocks and the pebbles and the sand in a jar? Lots of us will have heard that, I'm sure. So the story goes that there's a professor of philosophy standing in front of his class with an empty jar, and he fills it with rocks. And he asks the students, is the jar full? And they say yes. But then he pours in some smaller pebbles, and they all filter in and fill in between the gaps. And he says, well, is it full now? And they say, yes, it's full. And then he pours in some sand, which filters in again and fills in all the remaining space. And he says, is the jar full? And the students agree again, yes, it's full. And then he goes on to explain that that jar represents everything that's in your life. The rocks are the things that are most significant, the important things like your family, your health. And if the pebbles and the sand weren't there, the jar would still be full because those things are in it. The pebbles are the other things that matter, but you could live without. And the sand is all the other stuff, the material possessions, the social media, all the other things that fill our lives and our time. And the point is that we have to fill the jar in the right order. If we fill it with all the pebbles and the sand first, there's no room for the rocks. There's no room for the things that we say are important. And interestingly, depending on which version of the story you've heard, it tends to end with something like, and no matter how full the jar is, there's always room for a glass of wine or a cup of coffee or a bottle of beer to pour in the top, because there's always time for a drink with friends. And so that first question that I've asked you is, what or who do you say is most important? And I want to suggest that God should take the top spot on that list. Because I want to suggest that when we put God first, when he is the first rock in the foundation of that jar, then the other things find their place. When we put God first, we grow in our understanding of who he is and therefore who we are. And we are transformed. We become more Christ-like. We become better in all the other things that we are doing, in all the other areas of our lives. And Dave and Abby this morning have demonstrated that, haven't they? They've chosen to say, yes, these children are ours, but actually first they're yours. And we recognize that, and we want to give them back to you. We want to put you in first place because we know that will make us better parents. And as a church family, we've committed to the same. And so the next question is the really challenging one. You ready? The next question is this: if I had access, and you'll be pleased to know I don't, if I had access to your calendar, your bank statement, your messages, your emails, your bucket list, what would I think is most important to you? If I had access to your calendar, your bank statements, your emails, your messages, your bucket list, what would I think is most important to you? And I found that a really challenging but really helpful thing to consider. And I'm going to suggest that in life groups or throughout this week that you perhaps take some time to really think that through. Because we heard in that Deuteronomy reading, hear, O Lord, hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. Love the Lord with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your strength. And Jesus echoed that again in that Mark reading that we heard at the beginning of our service, when one of the teachers of the law says, which command is the most important? Jesus says, love the Lord your God with all your heart, and with all your soul, and with all your mind, and with all your strength. So first, I want to pick up on that comment, the Lord is one. Monotheism, the belief in only one God, was a distinctive feature. Many ancient religions chose to acknowledge many gods, but the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, the one true God. People then preferred to place their trust in many gods, and I wonder if perhaps nothing has really changed. We are called to love and serve the one true God, but we are good at setting up other gods and idols for ourselves, aren't we? What about the God of success, or the God of wealth, or the God of social media, the God of self-image, or the God of keeping up appearances, or countless others that I've not mentioned? Which of those gets our time? Which of those gets our energy? Which of those gets our finances? Which of those gets our worship? And we know that so many things in life are crying out for our attention with promises of happiness and a better life. And we might even say that we know those are empty promises, that they never satisfy, certainly not in the long term. And yet we are drawn in again and again. And so perhaps today, this week, we need to notice afresh where we might have gone off track and commit to getting back on track. Because when we choose to worship the one true God, the promise of life is not an empty promise, because he is the one who gives and sustains life, and who sent his son so that we could know life in all of its fullness. When we talk about faith or believing in God, we often skip ahead to the wonderful promise of eternal life, which is true and incredible. But I think it's also important to remember that life with God is about a fulfilled life now too. And when God gives a command, it's never for any reason other than for our best, for our flourishing. He knows what is best for us, and it's not about giving us instructions for any other reason, but then for us to know life in all its fullness. And as we have celebrated the dedication of Reuben and Ezra this morning, what a great reminder to think about what we want to model for our children too. As James picked out in that Deuteronomy reading, it talked about impressing God's commandments upon our children, talking about it with them, modeling it for them. Do we want our children to grow up trusting in promises like, you'll need this much money and you'll be okay? Or you need to make these people like you, then you'll fit in just fine? Or you need to look like this? Or do we want them to grow up trusting in promises like the one true God, the creator of the universe, is with you and for you and will never leave you? Once we've established that the Lord is one, the only true God, then there is that command to love him with all our heart and with all our strength and with all our soul and with all our mind. And in the Message it says, love God, your God, with your whole heart. Love him with all that's in you. Love him with all that you've got. And again, that command is because God knows what is best for our lives. So what does that look like? What does it look like to love God with all that we've got? Because if you think about it, it's interesting to be commanded to love, isn't it? Perhaps we think of love as an emotion that we either feel or we don't feel. But actually, this suggests that it's an act of will, that we can choose to relate to God and others in a loving way, regardless of how we feel. I guess, like with any relationship, to love is a choice to trust. It's a choice to spend time with someone. It's a choice to communicate honestly. And it's a choice to be willing to make sacrifices. And so as we think about how we can love God more fully this morning, with all that we have, perhaps that will look like spending more time with him in prayer, or spending more time in his word. Perhaps it will mean spending more time talking about him with our children and our families and our friends. Perhaps it will mean a renewed commitment to church. Perhaps it will mean breaking old habits and forming new ones. Perhaps it will mean making some changes so that our everyday lives, our calendars, our bank statements, our messages, our emails, demonstrate our love for God above all else. Perhaps it will mean a fresh commitment to follow the commands of God, to love him and to love others. Perhaps it will mean allowing ourselves to trust him more fully today. Perhaps it will mean allowing ourselves to hold things more lightly or to let some things go. Perhaps it will mean forgiving or receiving forgiveness. Perhaps it will mean opening ourselves up and allowing, expecting God to speak to us, to lead us, to do his transforming work in us. And as I said earlier, this is not about feeling guilty or condemned. And it's not about feeling superior and proud of how well you're doing. And it's not about ticking boxes, because that Hebrews reading reminded us that rules and rituals have never cleansed people's hearts. The Mark reading said, loving God and loving others is more important than burnt offerings and sacrifices. It is only because of Jesus that we are free and able to know and love God. And so this is about wanting to receive and embrace all that God has for us, and to respond by worshipping him alone and loving him with all that we are. And I'll dare to say this morning that none of us is doing that perfectly just yet. And so my prayer is that we will be open to hear that challenge and willing to take some time to reflect on how we might need to respond. I'll pray. Father, thank you that above all else, we know that we are loved by you and that you want the best for us. And Lord, I pray that this morning we would be reminded of that we would rest confidently on that knowledge. But also, Lord, I pray that you will challenge us. We want to be people who give you all that we are. We want to be people who love you with all of our heart, all of our soul, all of our mind, and all of our strength. And Lord, we know that we need your help for us to do that. And so I pray that you would speak to us, that you would challenge us, that you would remind us of your love for us, and that you would help us today and in the week to come to love you more. Amen.